Hello, I'm Paul Beckwith, and I'm going to talk about a method of capturing huge amounts of carbon, which falls definitely under the category nature-based solutions for climate change. So I attended the conference on biodiversity back in December because it was in Montreal, just a few hours from Ottawa. And I also attended the COP conference, and it sort of gives me a good overview of what people are talking about and so on. But I came across a paper just recently, and it sort of matches my intuition, which is that, or just my feelings that, a big method that we can use to try to restore ecosystems to what they used to be. So think of the planet, say 100 years ago, when fish were teeming in the ocean. Now we've lost 90% of the large fish in the oceans. We've fished them out. And buffalo were roaming the plains of North America. The wildebeest were roaming the plains in Africa, southern Africa. There were whales, numerous whales and foxes and wolves and, large mammals on the planet in large numbers. And not only was there a lot of carbon stored in the flora and fauna, but there was also a huge interaction between the flora and fauna, between the large mammals specifically and plants, and the ability of the plants to store lots of carbon. So there's a lot of interactions, there's a lot of key functions that large mammals play. That's just one example in how their interactions with forests and grasslands and any other type of savanna, any other type of situation on the land. Also, the whales in the ocean. They were, by them in their ecosystem, through their normal functioning, huge amounts of carbon were stored, which just aren't being stored now because the numbers of these species has dwindled. So this paper I'm going to talk about just came out recently, and it identifies 9 key species or groups of species that if we work on restoration of their numbers, we can actually capture anywhere from about 5 to 6 gigatons of CO2 per year can be drawn out. We know that the biodiversity that we have now captures about 4 or so gigatons of CO2 per year. So by preserving biodiversity and species, we can maintain that 4, but we can actually increase it by 5 or 6 gigatons of CO2 per year, which is an enormous method. So, we tend to talk about technological solutions. We want some magic technology which sucks carbon out of the air, for example, direct air capture methods, or but we're looking right in the face at these massive ways we can draw carbon down in the atmosphere, and yet they're not really talked about that much. When we talk about biodiversity, it's more for the sake of preserving species. It's not for the amount of carbon that can be captured. So I'm going to talk all about these things in this video. And what I displayed here at the beginning is this map showing how, the different regions that where we could actually, restore life and have huge carbon capture. So this map is in this paper here called Trophic Rewilding Can Expand Natural Climate Solutions. So, and that's not tropics, right? Trophic is, it's the food chain, if you like. The different trophic levels are levels of complexity of life. Generally, you think of energy changing by about a factor of 10 from one trophic level to the next. So something on a trophic level will eat 10 of the smaller critters on the trophic level below it, and so on and so forth, until you get down to phytoplankton, zooplankton, and phytoplankton at the base of the food chain. Okay, so what I did is I went into Google and I just did a search. Restoring just 9 groups of animals could help, basically could help combat global warming. Okay, I knew there were some papers on that recently, so it came up with a whole bunch of things, and this is one of the better articles that came out the end of March. So rewilding animals could be key for climate. So let's have a look. So there was basically a new report published in Nature Climate Change, a very reputable journal, suggesting that trophic rewilding, or restoring and protecting the functional roles of animals in ecosystems, is an overlooked climate solution. And it is really big time. I mean, it's just not talked about enough in terms of the amount of carbon that can be captured. So the study shows that reintroducing just 9 species or groups of species, and these 9 are African forest elephant, American bison, fish, gray wolves, musk ox or musk oxen, sea otters, sharks, whales, and wildebeest. Now, wildebeest is a Dutch term for wild beasts. These are the antelope-like creatures that are mostly in the Serengeti and in southern Africa. So reintroducing just 9 species of these groups, it would help limit global warming. Now, they say to less than 1.5, but I think that bus has already sailed. But, you know, it's important to do it to try to halt or reduce climate change. Animals play a significant role in how much carbon plants, soil, and sediments can capture. So it's not just the carbon that's embedded in these animals, which is quite significant, but they, through their motions and daily lives, they redistribute seeds and nutrients. They disturb soil through digging, trampling, and nest building. And they allow way more carbon to be captured in the plants and the soil and the sediments than would be captured with in their absence. Okay, the plants can't do it by themselves. They need the symbiosis. They need the animals with them to complete the ecosystem, to generate powerful ecosystem services, if you like, to reduce climate change. So we need a change in mindset within science and policy to take advantage of the vast potential of wildlife. So when it comes to climate solutions, your first thought may not be the wildebeest. Okay, so let's look at the wildebeest here. And I just looked where is it? Here it is, wildebeest. So, you know, the wiki page on it. So it's basically, another name is the gnu. They're antelopes. They're native to eastern and southern Africa. Okay, there's 2 main species, the black wildebeest and the blue one. Okay, and the 2 species diverged about 1 million years ago, but they have a tremendous importance on the entire ecosystem. So I'll show you a specific paper that studies them in more detail. Basically, when their numbers are few, the region of the Serengeti can be a carbon source. You know, with loads of wildebeest running around on that land, as if their numbers are restored, then it becomes a carbon sink. The whole region becomes a very, very large carbon sink. So here's the blue wildebeest and the black wildebeest. Okay. This is where they're basically located. The black wildebeest are in the yellow areas. So there's fewer of those. The blue ones are in the blue areas, and the overlapping range is shown here in the brown. So they cover large areas of, eastern but mostly South Africa. Okay, so these species are vital for the region to capture carbon. And here's some of the migration of them. There's an aerial photo. They often follow zebra. Here's another photo here, as far as you can see, as far as the horizon goes. And here they're leaping into a river during the Great Migration. Okay, so they're a migratory population for the most part. There are some non-migratory ones that are kept in reserves. Each year, some East African populations of the blue wildebeest, they have a long-distance migration, which is timed to coincide with the annual pattern of rainfall and grass growth. Okay, so they're one of the very crucial species. If you're like me, you probably don't know much about them unless you're from the African continent. Okay, so let's go on here. So when it comes to climate solutions, your first thought may not be the wildebeest, but in the Serengeti region, these buffalo-looking antelopes are the key to carbon capture. They eat large amounts of grass and they recycle it back into the soil as their dung. So when their population plummeted in the early 90s due to disease transmitted from domestic cattle, the loss of natural grazing led to more frequent and intense wildfires, turning the Serengeti into a carbon source. So efforts to bring back or rewild the wildebeest population through disease management were a huge success. Okay, they managed to control the disease from the cattle, the populations came back up, so there was less frequent and less intense wildfires, so it restored the Serengeti region back into a carbon sink. So this idea of trophic rewilding, or restoring and protecting the functional roles of animals in ecosystems, it's an overlooked climate solution. And so this report goes into the details of that, and I'll show you this paper. The conservation of wildlife, allowing species to play their functional roles in ecosystems, it offers untapped potential as a solution to climate change. Rewilding, according to the paper, rewilding just 9 wildlife species or species groups, and I mentioned them, okay, that would contribute more than 95% of the annual requirement to achieve the global target of extracting 500 billion metric tons of CO2 from the atmosphere by 2100. This would help cap the global temperature rise. Now they say 1.5, that's gone already, 2 maybe. Anyway, this is a very powerful, significant way to capture carbon. Okay, this shows you one of the migrations here, just a wildebeest migration. The recovery of the numbers has helped turn the Serengeti ecosystem from a carbon source into a carbon sink. So there's a huge untapped potential to consider conserving wild animals as a climate solution. If you do some of the rough calculations, the numbers rival those of what the IPCC is right now promoting in terms of converting everything to solar or wind generation. The numbers are in the same ballpark. Okay, so these really are sort of no-brainer things to do to restore the wild animals, and the carbon capture will be enormous. Reducing carbon emissions is an indisputable solution to addressing the global climate crisis. But even if we stop burning fossil fuels immediately, the climate would continue to warm due to the excess carbon. So we have to scrub CO2 from the atmosphere. We have the technology to scrub CO2 from the atmosphere. It's called nature. Okay, I love that quote. Many nature-based climate solutions rightly emphasize the role of plants and soil as carbon sinks, but animals have a profound effect on how effective the plants and how effective the soil can actually be carbon sinks. Animals distribute seeds, and nutrients, disturb the soil by their digging, trampling, and nest building. All this action helps plants grow and store more carbon and can even prevent wildfires. Animals can also keep carbon in the soil and sediment by changing how microbes and chemicals work in these systems. So this is an example. There was an experimental study, and I'll show you that paper too, conducted in a tropical forest in Guyana. Okay, it found that the storage of carbon in trees and soil increased significantly by 3.5 to 4 times as the number of tree species increased from 10 to 70 tree species in the region. However, as the number of mammal species increased from 5 to 35 on the same plots, tree and soil carbon storage increased by another factor of 4 or 5 times. Okay, so it's the ecological system. It's the interaction of the animals within the ecosystems that is very important for capturing carbon. Okay, this is a tree seedling growing from dung of a tapir. Okay, sprouting right from the dung. Okay, but we need a change in mindset within science and policy to take advantage of the vast potential of wildlife to capture carbon, because we tend to be technocentric. We're just looking for technological solutions. Current natural climate solutions are focused primarily on protecting and restoring ecosystems like forests and grasslands, and they overlook the role that animals play in supplying nutrients, reducing fire risks, and helping plants grow. So wildlife, through their interaction with the environment, are the missing link between biodiversity and climate. Okay, so you know, and there's an urgency because we're losing populations of many animal species. So, you know, to successfully reintroduce wildlife into areas where humans live, we need to work closely with local communities to address the complex social issues that can affect the conservation efforts. Okay, and it goes on. Here's some black-tipped reef sharks. Right, so there's huge synergies between wildlife conservation and carbon storage. But you know, we don't know enough about it, right? The science is not yet robust enough, and the timescales involved in many cases are too slow given the urgency of the climate crisis. Trying to get this into international climate frameworks could even be a distraction from the only real global warming game changer, which is keeping fossil fuels in the ground. Okay, so animals by themselves are not going to solve the climate problem, but you know, it goes a long way to capturing carbon. It can do a large fraction of what we need to do. So let's have a look at the peer-reviewed scientific papers now. So this is the first one. Trophic rewilding can expand natural climate solutions. So natural climate solutions are being advanced to arrest climate warming by protecting and enhancing carbon capture and storage in plants, soils, and sediments in ecosystems. These solutions are viewed as having the ancillary benefit of protecting habitats and landscapes to conserve animal species diversity. Okay? However, this reasoning undervalues the role that animals play in controlling the carbon cycle. So there's scientific evidence presented that shows that protecting and restoring wild animals and their functional roles in ecosystems can enhance natural carbon capture and storage. Okay, so let's have a look at some of the figures here. Okay, so this is a change of mindset here that's required. So these are estimated animal effects on net ecosystem carbon storage and the spatial extent of ecosystems in which the animals occur. So how do we enhance carbon sinks and avoid emissions by protecting species? So here's the wildebeest. That's one of the 9 species. It's in the savanna, mostly grasslands with some trees. Southern Africa. The area is 2.5 times 10 to the 4th square kilometers. And the additional ecosystem CO2 uptake in gigatons of CO2 per year, it's 0.0044. So this is, it does capture carbon, but not huge amounts. the sea otter is in coastal kelp forests, and it's slightly better than the wildebeest in terms of CO2 uptake. The gray wolf has a much larger effect. It's in boreal forests. With enough gray wolves, the additional CO2 uptake because of the gray wolf interaction with the ecosystem is 0.26 gigatons of CO2 per year. Tiger and black-tipped reef and lemon sharks in coral reefs have some effect. Okay, the muskox is in Arctic wet meadows, is here. You know, fish have there's an enormous effect in fish. Marine pelagic, which is fish at the surface, and inshore fish in shallow waters, they can have because they cover such a huge area, they can have a huge factor to absorb 5.5 gigatons of CO2 per year in addition to what's being captured. So the total here is 5.8, okay, gigatons of CO2 per year if we focus on these species. Okay, now we can also enhance the sinks that exist by the carbon sinks by restoring species. Okay, so this is protecting these species, and if we restore these species, so African forest elephants in tropical forests, bison in tall or short grass prairies, a big chunk, baleen whales, a smaller chunk, but important for marine biodiversity. So the subtotal here is 0.608. If you add it to 5.8, you get 6.41. Okay, and okay, so basically, we can make a huge increase in CO2 uptake. Many gigatons of CO2 per year additionally can be captured by restoring these animals in ecosystems. Okay, and then that brings me down to this figure here again, which I showed you at the beginning. Okay, so what this is it shows you different regions around the planet, and they're all numbered. So let's have the numbers are explained down here. This is number 1. There was a typo. It doesn't appear. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and then the rest are numbered correctly. But it tells you the region. So 1 is the Yodoma, muskox, caribou, bison, and horse. 2 is the tundra. So Yodoma up here. 2 is the tundra, etc. So it goes through all of these different ecosystems, and then these are the numbers here associated with the numbers of the different species groups. Okay, and this is what they do in terms of foraging, in terms of, this is protecting carbon stores in these guys here. So, and what the effect is, negative or positive from the creature. Plus is positive and then negative. For example, soil CH4 methane release is reduced when you have, 1 and 2 from species 1 and 2. So up here and up here, because you're trampling and compressing the ground, and the melt of the permafrost and tundra rate decreases because the ground is more compressed, for example. Okay, so you can go through and look at the effects, and then this is enhancing carbon capture and storage, and so it rates all of the different creatures in this plot. Okay, so that's the key thing in this paper. So, basically, if we go to the results, or I think it was research needs, perspective, changing the current mindset. Yeah, so it's all okay. So basically, right here at the beginning, the proposed solutions focus from the Paris Agreement, etc., to limit global mean temperature rise. The solutions focus on reaching net zero fossil fuel CO2 emissions by a complete transition to renewable energy generation by 2050, halting deforestation, and land conversion to prevent the emissions of carbon already stored in ecosystems. However, these solutions alone will be insufficient because the heat trapping capacity of the CO2 that remains in the atmosphere will challenge the current efforts to even hold the temperature below 2. So we need negative emission solutions that remove and store 500 gigatons of atmospheric CO2 between now and 2100. That works out to 6.5 gigatons of CO2 per year. Okay, so natural climate solutions are being proposed as cost-effective and safe ways to capture the excess atmospheric CO2 and store it on land and in the oceans and water systems. Now, we need to recognize that natural biogeochemical processes within terrestrial and marine ecosystems, it already removes about 50% of human-caused CO2 emissions annually. So natural climate solutions is to increase that 50% number, first by protecting forest, wetland, coastal, and grassland ecosystems to avoid emissions of the 4 gigatons of CO2 per year that they currently capture. But if we restore and manage plants, soils, and sediments in these ecosystems and rewild them, we can store 5 to 6 gigatons of CO2 more each year. Okay, so it's like win-win. You know, the current 5 to 6 gigaton CO2 per year goal is a major step forward. But, you know, we still need to have a yearly reduction of 6.5 gigatons per year. So these natural solutions are key. They're key. So, you know, this is like win-win-win. I mean, basically restoring biodiversity, and, you know, lots of carbon is embodied within the increase in the numbers of wild creatures and the species richness, the number of different species. There's key ones that by restoring them, we can capture vast amounts of carbon. Okay, and people don't talk so much about these solutions, but they're very, you know, they're very important. So let's have a look at this guy here. This is the other paper. Mammal diversity influences the carbon cycle through trophic interactions in the Amazon. So, you know, biodiversity affects many ecosystem functions and services, including carbon cycling and carbon retention. While it's known that the efficiency of carbon capture and biomass production by ecological communities increases with species diversity, the role of vertebrate animals in the carbon cycle remains undocumented. So they have extensive data sets on high diversity Amazonian systems to figure out the relationship between animal and plant species richness, their feeding interactions, tree biomass, and carbon concentrations in soil. So mammal and tree species richness, the more species there are, the more biomass is captured in both the trees and the soils. Okay, so there's huge links to, it's like you're amplifying the carbon cycle, if you like. Okay, so they studied, what they did is they studied mammals. They counted mammals in the regions biweekly on 215 transects of 4 kilometers in length over 3 years. And they studied the feedings, they measured carbon in the soil, etc., etc. They measured trees, they measured the number of trees, the heights of the trees, the diameter of the trees. This is the region that they looked at. So these are, this is Brazil and Guyana. And these are the transects here, these lines. Rivers are shown, forest cover is in this region here, and villages are the dots. So they looked at all these regions. They looked at the number of trees, the heights of the trees, diameter of trees, so they could figure out how much atmospheric carbon was stored in trees. They looked at the feeding interactions of the different creatures, the organic remains, and the carbon in the soil. So they measured that, and let's look at the results. So here's the results. So they had a model which looked at, you know, the coefficients, how all of these things were important. So the carbon, this is carbon in the soil as a percentage. And they found that, okay, so the mammal richness, the more mammals there were, the more carbon was captured in the soil, and this was the coefficient. The trees richness, the more diversity in different types of trees, the more carbon would be captured. They correlated to distance near roads, distance near rivers, distance near villages, the longitude, the latitude, and the latitude was the biggest factor. Okay, temperature, precipitation. They also looked at carbon per tree in terms of kilograms, and the base mammal richness and tree richness, very high. Latitude was a big factor, so they correlated all of these things. The carbon stored, they came up with the carbon per area, megagrams of carbon per hectare, and then the coefficients on each of these different factors, and that allowed them to model what was going on. So here's some of the results. This is the carbon concentration in the soil as a percentage, 1 to 4%, and the mammal diversity, that's the number of species. So the more mammal species there were, the more carbon would be captured in the soil. So, here's like significant trend upward. This is the carbon concentration in the soil versus the tree diversity. Again, same sort of thing. The more number, the more the number of species of trees, the more the tree diversity, the different types of trees, the more carbon would be captured. This is carbon per tree in kilograms with mammal diversity here. So the more mammal diversity there was, the more carbon the trees would capture. The faster the trees would grow. And this is the carbon in the trees per area. Again, a trend upward, okay? So the mammal diversity is key for the trees to capture more and more carbon, okay? So it's the whole ecosystem and they did a lot of other work too, but basically the whole ecosystem needs to function. You need to have that diversity of trees, diversity of animals, and then you can get huge amounts of carbon captured. If you're lacking trees, if you're lacking any component of that ecosystem, then the carbon captured is much lower. So these are all open source papers, okay? So these are some key papers that show mammal diversity is hugely important. And if we go back to the original paper here, the first paper, there's basically 9 different species. There's 9 different species. If I go back to this article here, rewilding animals could be key for climate. Reintroducing just 9 species or groups of species would help limit global warming. Okay, we've already hit, we're very close. We can't really do much about 1.5, but to go above and beyond that, the animals play a huge role in how much carbon plants, soil, and sediments can capture by their actions that they do. Their digging, trampling, nest building, etc. Their interactions with the plants. So the whole ecosystem, in order to function efficiently, we could actually jolt it into capturing huge amounts of carbon, jolt nature into capturing huge amounts of carbon by being very careful and introducing like just 9 species or groups of species, and then it builds on itself. There's huge positive feedbacks. The more species and groups of species we have, the more other ones that come along, and huge amounts of carbon are captured. So these papers are very, very key. And like I say, just Google the titles. They're open source. This one was published February 13th. And this one here was published, I think about the same time, but actually it was, no, this is an older paper, November 2017. This is an older paper. So, this is not really new stuff, but it's just not talked about enough. There's not enough climate policy people that know anything about this. So we need to get them up to speed. Anyway, please consider donating to my PayPal on my website, paulbeckwith.net, to support my research and videos. And thank you once again for watching. Bye for now.